What if I told you that in the next 7 days your life could completely change, not because of luck, not because of some secret shortcut, but because you finally decided to understand why you do what you do? You see, becoming powerful isn't about dominance. It's not about showing the world how strong you are. Real power comes from clarity, from discipline, from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to settle for anything less, and becoming unrecognizable. That's not about changing your face, it's about changing your standards. Because the truth is, most people don't lack talent. They lack commitment. They lack consistency. They lack the courage to become someone they've never been before. But you're here, which means something inside you is ready. So over the next 7 days, this isn't just a challenge. This is a decision to stop negotiating with your excuses and start building a version of yourself that even you won't recognize. Here's keynote No.1 expanded in the style of Simon Sinek. Everything begins with why. Not what you want to achieve, not how fast you want to get there, but why it matters to you in the first place. Because when your why is weak, everything else collapses under pressure. You lose focus. You lose discipline. You start negotiating with your excuses. But when your why is clear, something shifts. Decisions become easier. Sacrifices make sense. Pain becomes part of the process instead of something to avoid. Most people start with the surface. They say, I want to be successful. I want to be powerful. I want to change my life. But those are outcomes, not reasons. Outcomes don't wake you up at 5 a.m. Outcomes don't push you when you're tired, distracted, or overwhelmed. Only a deep, emotional reason can do that. A reason that connects to who you are and who you refuse to remain. Your why is personal. It's not borrowed from social media. It's not copied from someone else's dream. It's rooted in your experiences, your frustrations, your ambitions, and your pain. Maybe it comes from a moment when you felt underestimated. Maybe it comes from a time you disappointed yourself. Or maybe it comes from a vision of the person you know you're capable of becoming but haven't yet stepped into. That reason matters because it creates meaning behind your actions. When you don't define your why, you drift. You follow trends. You chase validation. You start comparing your journey to everyone else's, and slowly you lose yourself. But when you know your why, you stop competing with others. You start building something that is yours. Something that reflects your values, your standards, and your identity. Clarity of why also builds resilience. Because this journey is not easy. There will be moments when you feel like quitting. Days when progress feels invisible. Times when doubt gets louder than confidence. And in those moments, you don't rely on motivation. Motivation is temporary. It fades. It changes. But your why, if it's strong enough, stays. It becomes the anchor that holds you steady when everything else feels uncertain. Your why also defines your standards. It shapes the choices you make every single day. If your why is weak, your standards will be low. You'll accept distractions. You'll tolerate inconsistency. You'll settle for comfort. But if your why is strong, your standards rise automatically. You start saying no to things that don't align. You protect your time. You become more intentional with your actions. This is where transformation really begins. Not when you set a goal, but when you align your actions with a purpose. Because goals can change. Circumstances can change. But a strong why creates direction no matter what happens around you. It keeps you moving forward even when the path is unclear. And here's the truth most people ignore. Your why must be bigger than your excuses, bigger than your fear, bigger than your comfort zone. Because if it's not, you will always find a reason to stop. You will always find a way to delay, to procrastinate, to settle. But when your why becomes non-negotiable, your behavior follows. You stop asking, do I feel like it? And start saying, this is who I am. Most people set goals. Very few people set standards. And that's the difference between temporary change and lasting transformation. A goal is something you want to achieve. A standard is something you refuse to fall below. Goals are external targets. Standards are internal commitments. And when you rely only on goals, you give yourself permission to stop once you reach them. But when you build standards, you change the way you live every single day. Think about it. Someone says, I want to lose weight. That's a goal. But what happens after they lose it? They go back to old habits because nothing inside them truly changed. Now, compare that to someone who says, I don't miss workouts. I don't eat carelessly. I take care of my body because that's who I am. That's a standard. It doesn't end. It becomes part of their identity. This is where most people get it wrong. They focus on outcomes instead of identity. They chase results instead of building systems. They ask, what do I want? Instead of asking, who do I need to become? Because real power doesn't come from achieving something once. It comes from becoming the kind of person who lives at a higher level consistently. Rising your standards means changing what you tolerate, not just from others, but from yourself. It means you stop accepting excuses. You stop justifying distractions. You stop allowing yourself to operate below your potential. Because every time you tolerate something small, procrastination, inconsistency, lack of effort, you reinforce a version of yourself that you claim you don't want to be. Standards create discipline without needing motivation. Because when something is a standard, it's not optional. You don't debate it. You don't question it. You do it because it's part of who you are. Just like brushing your teeth or showing up to something important, it becomes automatic. And that's the level most people never reach because they stay dependent on how they feel. Feelings are unreliable. Some days you'll feel driven. Other days you won't. If your actions depend on your emotions, your progress will always be inconsistent. But when your actions are tied to your standards, your behavior becomes stable. You show up regardless of how you feel. Raising your standards also requires honesty. You have to look at your current habits and admit where you're falling short. Not to criticize yourself, but to understand the gap between who you are and who you say you want to become. Because you cannot raise your standards if you're not willing to confront your reality. And here's the uncomfortable part: raising your standards will separate you from your old life. The things you used to accept will no longer feel okay. The people you used to relate to might not understand you anymore. The routines you were comfortable with will start to feel limiting. Growth creates distance. And not everyone is willing to accept that. But that's the price of transformation. You don't become a stronger version of yourself by holding on to everything that keeps you average. You evolve by letting go of what no longer aligns with your standards. Standards also shape your environment. When you expect more from yourself, you naturally start expecting more from your surroundings. You become more selective with your time, your energy, and your focus. You stop wasting effort on things that don't contribute to your growth. And over time, your environment begins to reflect your mindset. This is how you become unrecognizable, not through one big change, but through a series of small decisions that align with higher standards. Decisions that most people ignore because they seem insignificant. Waking up when you said you would. Finishing what you started. Doing the work even when no one is watching. These moments seem small, but they compound into something powerful. Because at the end of the day, your life is not defined by your goals. It's defined by what you repeatedly accept, what you consistently do, what you refuse to compromise on. If you accept inconsistency, you will become inconsistent. If you accept mediocrity, you will stay average. But if you decide that certain behaviors are no longer acceptable, no matter how uncomfortable it feels, you begin to shift your identity. And once your identity shifts, everything else follows. Your habits improve, your focus sharpens, your confidence grows. Not because you achieved something big overnight, but because you proved to yourself again and again that you can operate at a higher level. Raising your standards is not about perfection. It's about intention. It's about deciding that you are no longer okay with being the person you used to be. It's about setting a new baseline for how you think, how you act, and how you show up in your life every single day. Because once you raise your standards, going back is no longer an option. Discipline is more reliable than motivation. Motivation feels powerful in the moment. It gives you a surge of energy, a sense of urgency, a belief that you can change everything overnight. But it's temporary. It comes and goes. It depends on your mood, your environment, your circumstances. And the moment those things shift, motivation fades. That's why so many people start strong and then slowly fall back into old habits. Discipline works differently. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel. It doesn't wait for the perfect time. It doesn't rely on inspiration. It's built on a decision that certain actions are non-negotiable regardless of your emotions. And once that decision is made, discipline takes over where motivation disappears. Most people misunderstand discipline. They think it's about being strict, rigid, or extreme. But discipline is actually about consistency. It's about showing up when it's inconvenient. It's about doing the work when it's boring, repetitive, or uncomfortable. Because real growth doesn't happen in moments of excitement. It happens in moments of repetition. There will be days when you don't feel like doing anything. Days when your energy is low, your focus is scattered, and your confidence is shaken. In those moments, motivation will not save you. It won't suddenly appear and push you forward. But discipline will. Because discipline is not based on feeling. It's based on identity. When you become disciplined, you stop asking, do I feel like doing this? And start saying, this is what I do. That shift is powerful because it removes the emotional negotiation that keeps most people stuck. Instead of debating with yourself, you act. Instead of delaying, you execute. Discipline also builds trust, not with others, but with yourself. Every time you follow through on something you said you would do, you strengthen that trust. You prove to yourself that your words have meaning. And over time, that trust becomes confidence. Not the kind of confidence that comes from external validation, but the kind that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself. On the other hand, every time you break a promise to yourself, that trust weakens. You start to doubt your own ability to follow through. You hesitate more. You question yourself more. And slowly, your self-image begins to decline. That's why discipline is not just about productivity. It's about self-respect. Discipline creates structure in your life. It reduces chaos. It eliminates unnecessary decisions. Because when your actions are defined by habits, you don't waste energy deciding what to do next. You already know. And that clarity allows you to focus on execution instead of overthinking. It also protects you from distraction. In a world full of noise, where attention is constantly being pulled in different directions, discipline acts as a filter. It helps you stay focused on what matters. It keeps you aligned with your priorities. Because without discipline, it's easy to get lost in things that feel urgent but are not important. One of the hardest parts of building discipline is starting when no one is watching. There's no applause, no recognition, no immediate reward. Just effort, just repetition. Just the quiet decision to keep going. And that's where most people stop. They look for external validation to justify their actions. But discipline doesn't need validation. It operates independently of recognition. Discipline is also uncomfortable. It requires you to act against your impulses, to choose long-term growth over short-term pleasure, to delay gratification in a world that constantly promotes instant results. And that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something different. Because if everything feels easy, nothing is changing. Growth demands effort. It demands focus. It demands that you stretch beyond what feels natural. And discipline is the tool that allows you to do that consistently. Over time, discipline compounds. Small actions, repeated daily, begin to create noticeable results. Not immediately, but gradually. And those results reinforce the behavior. They create momentum. And once momentum builds, everything becomes easier to sustain. This is how transformation actually happens. Not through bursts of motivation, but through sustained discipline. Through the ability to keep going when the excitement fades. Through the willingness to do what needs to be done, even when it doesn't feel rewarding in the moment. And eventually, discipline becomes part of who you are. It stops feeling forced. It stops feeling unnatural. It becomes your default way of operating. You don't think about it, you just do it. That's the level where real power exists, not in moments of inspiration, but in the ability to remain consistent without it. Because when you no longer depend on motivation, nothing can interrupt your progress. Distractions don't destroy your life in one moment. They do it slowly, quietly, over time. They look harmless at first. A few extra minutes scrolling, one more video, one more delay, one more excuse to start later. And because these actions feel small, you convince yourself they don't matter. But they do. Because what you repeatedly give your attention to eventually shapes your habits, your focus, and your identity. Focus is a limited resource. Every day, you wake up with a certain amount of mental energy, and how you choose to spend that energy determines the direction of your life. If your attention is scattered, your results will be scattered. If your focus is weak, your progress will be inconsistent. And most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they lack focus. The modern world is designed to distract you. Everything is competing for your attention. Notifications, messages, endless content, constant updates. And the more you engage with these distractions, the more they train your mind to seek quick stimulation instead of deep work. You lose the ability to concentrate. You lose the patience required to build something meaningful. Eliminating distractions is not about doing more. It's about doing less, but with intention. It's about identifying what truly matters and removing everything that doesn't align with it. Because every distraction you allow is taking time and energy away from something more important. Most people try to manage distractions. They say they'll limit them. They say they'll control them. But control requires constant effort, and eventually that effort fades. The stronger approach is elimination. Not partial reduction, but complete removal of what consistently pulls you away from your goals. This requires awareness. You have to recognize what is actually distracting you. Not what sounds obvious, but what is subtly draining your focus. It could be your phone. It could be certain people. It could be habits that feel normal, but add no real value to your growth. And once you identify them, you have to make a decision. Not later, not eventually, now. Because the longer you tolerate distractions, the more power they gain over you. They become habits, they become routines, and breaking them becomes harder over time. But when you remove them early, you protect your focus before it gets fragmented. Elimination also creates space. Space for clarity, space for deep thinking, space for meaningful action. When your environment is free from